Since their entry into Kabul, the Taliban have intimidated and tortured reporters, and we've seen the mass exit of female journalists from the field. According to Reporters Without Borders, fewer than 100 of the capital's 700 or so female journalists are still working. And the situation is even more dire in other parts of the country. Those who have chosen to continue to report face attacks or harassment. DW's Nick Connolly is in Kabul with more.
A woman's voice on the airwaves. In today's Afghanistan, that's no longer a given. Indeed, in several provinces, it's already a thing of the past. Here in Kabul, Mariam Hatak spends an hour on weekday mornings talking to listeners of her phone-in show, taking musical requests and quizzing them on their general knowledge. A format familiar to listeners the world over. But even here, in the apparent safety of the radio studio, the Taliban takeover has not passed without trace.
We can't laugh like before on air. We can't joke with our audience the way we used to. The whole program isn't as free. I've even had to change my clothes.
Indian dance music has been replaced by nasheeds or religious recitations, and the music that is left is local, low-key, and for the most part sung by men. And all this has happened without the new Taliban authorities having to give any direct instructions. They didn't have to. This radio station's management, like most other Afghan media, are already doing everything they can not to draw undue attention. Given all the restrictions imposed on what was previously a free-form show, does she still believe she can do the job she set out to do?
Often, people can't share what they have in their hearts with the people around them. So they call the radio and share their thoughts with a presenter. They feel like they're just talking to the host, but actually they're talking to the whole community.
Mariam tells us that several of her female colleagues from this station have already left the country in recent weeks, fearing for their personal safety.
I'm not scared doing my job. What I am scared about is the media as a whole falling silent. For us as women, the future is unclear. Will we be able to get an education or go to work? I think we need to take risks, to struggle. Afghan women won't get their rights without a struggle. In the end, we will achieve our rights. It's not impossible.
That's something she discovered in her own family. As the first woman to work outside the home, let alone in journalism, she had years of disapproval to deal with. She worked under a pseudonym because her family didn't want to be associated with her public persona. Now she says they're proud of her, and the relatives who once criticised her choices nowadays come to her for advice on how to find their own daughters jobs.
Joining us is Nick Connolly in Kabul. Nick, what has been the impact of so many female journalists exiting newsrooms?
Well, it's obviously been a devastating blow for Afghanistan's media that was very pluralistic and very vibrant over the last few years, but more instantly in terms of the effect now, the knock-on is that women's voices aren't being heard in a country, in a system now, the Taliban, which puts so much store on separating, keeping women apart from men outside their immediate families. It basically means that Afghan journalists are male journalists. Those that remain are unable to interview women on the street, but even in private it's very difficult. And without those female colleagues, those stories of those women here in Afghanistan are just not being told.
And it's not just in the journalism industry. Now women face limited access to education, and we've seen them turn out to protest over the last few weeks in Kabul. How have the Taliban responded?
They never say that this is an outright ban on education. They say it's a matter of time, that they're coming up with some new system that will keep women safe. It has to be said that was the same story back in the 90s, where women were kept away from education, from schooling, under the pretext of some temporary measures and the search for a better system. The women you talk to here tell you that even under the previous government, there was never mainstream co-education here. The sexes, at least in school, were kept apart, and they don't believe that this time around the Taliban are going to behave any differently. They think this is just a tactic to keep women quiet and to promise them something that will never actually happen. I think the interesting thing to bear in mind here is that the onus is always put on the women for them to separate themselves, to be isolated for their own safety, rather than expecting men to behave better around women, doing things that would make ordinary Afghan men make it easier for women to get their education and to go to work.
And based on what you've said so far, I suspect I know the answer, but in general, are you seeing any women moving around the city, or has the landscape really changed so much since the Taliban rolled into town and you only see men on the streets now?
I think Kabul is still the exception. It is a place where you see more women, and not all are wearing burqas. Obviously, the women you see are all wearing some kind of face covering, but that can be something from a sort of Iranian-style headscarf to a more closed niqab. But it isn't a kind of unified picture. But definitely in the public sphere, in restaurants, bars, it is very male-dominated. And women you see are out shopping, often with other women, but not yet always accompanied by their male relatives, as in the 90s. Lots of women you talk to here say they think that is a matter of time, that the Taliban are aware that given the economic crisis, given the fact that they need Western humanitarian help to keep this country afloat, they're not really cracking down fully yet, and are just letting people get used to their presence in control before turning the screws slowly over the next weeks and months.
Nick Connolly, thank you so much for joining us.